Welcome to If the Public Only Knew, the show that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build and lead a business. Host Gary Sinderbad sits down with some of today's most dynamic CEOs, founders, and leaders to dig into their origin stories, hard-earned lessons, and the missteps that nearly derailed it all. These are unfiltered, no-hype conversations designed to inspire, challenge, and fuel your own journey. Now here's your host, Gary Sinderbad.
Welcome back to If the Public Only Knew. I'm your host, Gary Sinderbad. Today's guest, I think, approaches his craft a bit different than most. A comment that he made to me just a few moments ago, starting with a science background, was working through the science in his company was easy. It was the people that were hard. And Jim, my experience is about the same. Working for large corporations for most of my career, now doing something a bit more on my own, much like you, in kind of a related business. So Jim Bishop, Conjunction Leadership, welcome to the podcast. I do appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Gary.
So Jim, you mentioned that when you came out of school, you were headed more towards the applied sciences area where things are definitive, where you can basically count on things coming out mostly the same way. Most of the time, or if it doesn't, that's instructive as well. But something happened along the way, apparently, when you started to work with teams of people that you didn't expect. Can you take me through that growing realization that, as you say, the science was easy, but the people were the challenge? How did that come about?
Gary. We all, as we get older, have the benefit of looking in retrospect and saying it was a beautiful accident, right? And I really think it was. I went to school. I got a bachelor's and master's degree, both in science. Fully intended to put myself in that situation and use my intellect and my kind of aptitude in that regard to say, science was. It became easy for me even when I studied it. So I thought for sure when I went into the work world, it was going to be a place where I could use that aptitude and help create differences in the workplace. I went into technical service essentially. So I was working with our customers and trying to help them apply the science behind the products and the service that we were giving. And almost every time I was working with a client, the question would always come up like, what do we do with these people? How do we hire them and train them? Or how do we keep them on board? And how do we pay them differently? And that really wasn't something that I had gone to school for, but there was something that kind of resonated with me a little deeper inside and just said, this must be a really big issue. And I could reflect upon all of my collegiate experiences of being in clubs and organizations or team projects and realize, it wasn't the project that was hard. It was just aligning everyone to get the project done. And it wasn't the club that was difficult. It was all the personality differences that we had. So I realized business must be like at least what I was experienced in leading teams and organizations, even in college. So what I started doing was just bringing people to that solution, bringing my HR team in, or at the early days of the internet, researching some tools or things that might be able to help. And I had built a pretty large contact base of people that were supporting me in this journey in my career. So I started bringing them in. And what I realized in that was there was an opportunity even for people to connect at a different level when it came to their deeper frustrations. Long story, but I decided at one point in that journey, I didn't want to go into the science any further, and I wanted to go learn how people learn. So I took another job in more of an instructional design capacity to try and get the mindset of an adult, learned how to educate a little differently, learned what was the difference between student learning and adult learning, and then started authoring programs to that effect. That led into understanding more and more about instructional design, curriculum management. So a training career was the most obvious next one, and just learning how to do corporate leadership training. That meant facilitating a lot of programs, getting a lot of reps under my belt of delivering program after program, learning model after model, getting connected with some great leadership vendors and gurus in the marketplace. And then that meant to leading leadership teams and leadership organizations, working in talent management, career pathing, succession management, and eventually executive coaching. So that's why I come full circle and say it was kind of a perfect accident that it happened that way, because it did help me find what I was most naturally passionate about. And I've built a career working with scientific professionals, but trying to keep their head on straight and keep them motivated, keep them focused on what is the bigger picture they're trying to strive after. And so I've been able to do both.
What initially sparked your interest in science? Do you recall?
I grew up in a rural environment, an agricultural environment, particularly. We had a lot of animals around us, and at that point in time, the person that I identified with most was the veterinarian who came on our market on our farm and would help us with our animals. And he started taking a natural interest in me, and he took me to his alma mater, to his university, which happened to be Purdue. He helped me get to understand what that meant and what that looked like, and I started seeing people working in labs or people working with animals, and I knew that we needed both of those things, and it was all called science. And I just started paying attention to what I liked and didn't like in school when I was studying, and biology or biological sciences or chemistry. All of those things seemed like they came relatively easy to me. So when it came time to choose a college major, I just thought this was the most natural path. So
When you think about where you are now and how you kind of iterated to the solutions that you offer, what strikes me is you kind of follow the scientific method. Is
yes,
that a fair statement?
it's a very fair statement. I think that's, looking at how this all, like the cosmic accident of getting into coaching, right? Not only do I work with scientific leaders, but I also have the chance to use my science background in that. And so my master's degree is actually in physiology and behavior, right? The intersection of the brain and the body, if you will. Um, and so I really, really patterned a lot of my work after just becoming a natural student of the nervous system and the endocrine system and how all of those things function and help us build this thing called our emotional system, our emotional belief system. So I tell people all the time, I work between the axis of biology, behavior, and belief. And we can't get to new behaviors until we understand what was behind that. How does our biology affect it? Because what we really need to do is alter our belief. I'm sure there are a lot of other coaches. I have many friends that work in kind of mindset coaching for sure. And I have a lot of coaches that work probably more in the training aspect of down there around where the behavior change can occur. We give you new skills. But I think I'm unique in the fact that I probably work in between there and I work more in the biological systems of understanding like what is their endocrine system doing in relationship to your nervous system and how does that cement this feeling of belief in your body that sometimes you don't know how to work it out. And so, how do we hack the nervous system? How do we hack the endocrine system? How do we maintain overall optimal wellness and just help people get into that space where they're actually leading their life and leading their career rather than reacting to the world around them? So,
I'm encouraged by your comment about the concept, or I would say the confluence of events. It's much more of a confluence than a conflation. When you
yeah,
talk about belief in biology, growing up as a financial advisor is a very lonely job, especially when you start. No one wants to talk to you. You don't know anything. You can't even, but you wish you had a quarter so you could call somebody and get a down payment on a clue. But it's trial and error, and it requires a great deal of grit, perspicacity, belief, and a strong focus on what the future can bring you, regardless of how unrealistic that appears. And I never really understood it before. I just thought it
mm,
was just, just being dog-headed. And then I started to study the reticular activation system, which is a perfect
yeah,
example of the blend of biology and belief,
yes, yes,
because it's that focus, that singular focus, that is going to allow your brain to funnel those 40 gajillion things that come into your head every day down to the 10 or 11 that matter, which you can then manifest, even though you're not quite sure how you're going to get to that larger goal. Having trained thousands of financial advisors, that's a concept that most of them realize in retrospect, because it's difficult to take someone who is mid-career, let's say, and have them formulate a belief that is literally outrageous. It's incomprehensible. It's irrational. From the outside, it sounds crazy. But I would venture to say, in your experience, that's probably something you talk about.
yes,
That so walk me through that, because I'm a huge believer in that. It's what allowed me to be successful at a young age at Merrill. It also allowed me to go on and write training for thousands of advisors. But it's kind of a tough concept to place in front of people unless they've experienced it. Take me through it if you would.
In what regard? In a client journey or in a scientific
You've
process?
got We can kind of do both, but you've got someone has just not even come close to what their potential is, both as an individual and as a leader.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you know what their potential is. You're very comfortable in the fact that their brain functions properly, and it's just a question of kind of re-architecting both their biology and their beliefs. How do you get them to open their brains enough to actually take that or grasp something that maybe a week ago they would have said, "This is insane. I can't do it." How
Yeah,
do you get them to think
absolutely.
about that?
Well, yeah, it's great, Gary. I have several clients that are in that ballpark, right? So and most of them will call me and say, I just feel like I'm drained or I'm losing my mojo or I'm stuck even. They might use those words, right? So it's really an exercise in listening and just learning to attune to their language and understand where they're going. And when I hear that, what I can start absorbing is understanding that what's happening is they have reached what I would call the upper limit, their upper limit potential, because they have a cap on what they believe is available to them. They just don't know. Um, Sometimes that comes because of experiences on our life, words that others spoke over us, or things that they have. So, a client that came to me recently was just stuck, just didn't feel like they had achieved everything they wanted to achieve, and they wanted more. They wanted to go further in their career and their aspirations, but they also felt like I'm going to have to work harder to do that. They felt the trade off was going to be too much. The grind and the hustle culture was just getting to them too much. So they were caught in this limbo. Do I just accept where I'm at, spend my next 10 years living it out this way and kind of settle? Or what do I do with this sense of ambition that I've always had as I grow my career higher and higher and higher? But now, if I look higher, there's only a few spots in that hierarchy where I'd like to go. And I'm not sure that I'm really willing to give up what I've got. So they were in this constant spinning state between there. Right. So stepping into that, just listening to their language, listening to where they were at, I was able to kind of help them see, like, what is it? It's almost as if, you've had this experience, you've touched a hot stove in the past, or you've had this traumatic experience and you don't want to go near that stove ever again. You've just pulled yourself away. So, where in the past have you felt this before? Is the most natural question. Um, they mentioned, and you and I were chatting earlier, like they had done a ton of business travel. They've essentially sold their soul to the corporation, if you will. Traveled all over the world, done everything that they needed to do to get what they wanted to get, only to be told that they weren't the next in line for the promotion. Right. And they knew this story, but they didn't know that how it had affected their biology. They hadn't
Mm.
really paid attention to it. They had kind of distanced from it, quote unquote, rub some dirt on it, just get over it, get through it, stuff it away, pretend it didn't exist, and move on. Well, when we step back into it, I do some somatic exercises, some breathing exercises, just kind of let them attune to who they are as an individual and kind of drop the brain waves down just a few notches. And when they did that, I'm like, what are you noticing in your body? And they have tightness in my back, have tightness in my shoulders, tightness in my hips, and not uncommon. Almost all of us carry stress and tension there, right? And I'm like, but how is that manifesting? Long story, but they had gone to doctor after doctor after doctor. They had some chronic issues in their situation. They were trying to get the tension released and figure this out from a medical perspective, but they had never really thought of it being kind of a psychological perspective. We brought it back to the case when they were traveling in the hotels and they were doing all these things, carrying their baggage in and out and all the stress of the day. It was always hard for them to unwind. It was just hard for them to try to relax because they weren't at home and their family wasn't there with them. And they carried that quote unquote traumatic experience in their body. Now, is this a major trauma? No, but is it a lot of minor traumas over time where maybe no one understood and no one was there with you as you were suffering through these questions of life? Yeah, absolutely it was. They had carried all that trauma for years in their shoulders and their back. And when we were breathing into those spaces and understanding their biology, what they were able to say is, I feel that same tension right now, even in the midst of this decision. And it was an aha moment for them that their body physically had become hard and calloused a little bit, protecting them from the weariness and the dangers of life. And now, as they were in this next space of saying, do I go further or do I go backwards or do I settle for what I've already gotten? They were realizing if I move forward, I feel like I'm going to get tight again. I'm going to get restricted again. I'm going to get bound up, so to speak. And we were able to kind of help them bring that back down, monitor their biology, monitor their response, help them in that, and open up some spaces in their brain then for them to be able to say, if I move to the next level or take the different job, whatever it may be, I'm just going to have to learn how to present and show myself differently than I have in the past, which means putting more boundaries and standards and less tolerations in their life than they've ever had in the past. So if I have better boundaries, then I'm going to be able to say yes to the things that make me better and say no to the things that don't. But that was a concept that they didn't have in the hustle and grind culture because they were doing whatever they could to whoever they wanted to get ahead. And they realized, for me to take the one or two spots that are still ahead of me, I got to calm my biology, allow my belief to set, see a bigger future for me, and then be able to put some disciplines in my life that I just have never exhibited before to make sure that the best of me stays in and the worst of the world stays out. So,
You touch on so many similarities to what I experienced personally and what I try and train other advisors to guard against. And a lot of it is them recognizing they have permission to look in those dark places. And
yes,
also understand when you use the term traumatic experiences, we tend to think about, PTSD and things like that. But traumatic experiences have a very different storage zone in your brain than your normal memory. There's
yes,
no clock in that portion of your brain. It always feels like it just happened. That's why PTSD is so hard to treat. There was a movie that came out umpteen years ago with Jim Carrey called The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where he had had a very traumatic event emotionally with a woman he was dating, and he was trying to find some medication that could block the memory. They were actually doing some studies on that, I believe, at Harvard or Yale, with certain types of beta blockers that would prevent emotional memory from anchoring. But it's something that, as a financial advisor, you run into all the time and probably is more responsible for 90% of younger financial advisors failing than anything else, which is you just hear a lot of people tell you no when you first start, and
mm,
that initial call gets heavier and harder, and you just don't want to make it anymore because you just don't want to get banged in the head again, not recognizing that, yeah, you're one closer to a yes. You don't know what's going to happen on the next call. And if you really believe in what you're doing, you've got to look at that longer term time horizon and just take it from the perspective of, if someone tells you no, it's their loss because they don't know not only who you are, but who you believe you're going to become. And I think it's that second part that you get these people to start to think about. So I completely understand what you're saying. And it's interesting because I never would have thought about it from a business travel perspective. But yeah, I
yeah,
agree with that because when I was traveling all the time, I remember having to go to, I don't know where the hell I was going, but I was in an airport on a Sunday afternoon and my son was playing a baseball game back home. And you just feel like a complete idiot. Like, what are you doing with your life?
yeah,
I'm never going to see that game. I'm never going to see it again. And it really does shape things going forward.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I've often heard the phrase like trauma isn't necessarily what happens to us. It's the fact that we might have been unseen in that moment or
hmm,
unfelt. Like, so in that case, if you're traveling in the airport, it wasn't necessarily anything that was done to you. Although, major trauma certainly sometimes does violate our own person or our personal sense of boundaries. But in this case, there wasn't a lot being done to you. You of your own volition were traveling in the airport. But the fact that you had these strong emotional feelings and there wasn't an outlet for them or someone to see you in the middle of that, or maybe if it's like a lot of my other clients that have a Y chromosome, it's just the fact that we don't want to be seen in those strong emotions. So we will tend to continue to distance from it, right? We might be our greatest inflictor of our own emotional trauma sometimes because we isolate ourselves in the middle of those strong feelings, not knowing what they are, and there's nowhere for them to go. And so, really, trauma is just a trapped emotion. It's just stuck energy in our body where emotions that are allowed to move freely through us, like love and pleasantness, we want those to happen. And we don't hold those as negative experiences, but it's those strong and non pleasant emotions, if you will, that sometimes we just don't want to feel and we'll distance from them. Or we just don't go anywhere with them and tell anyone about them, and they don't move anywhere. So they just stay in our body. And generally they centralize in a part of our body that just time after time after time is like a wound getting re-injured over
Yeah.
and over, and the body forms a callus around it. So
So you're traveling now, right? I assume.
I travel some. I don't travel a lot, but the difference is I travel with um, my own sense of volition. Like I choose to do this. Where in corporate America days, I was doing it not with that same sense of volition. I was doing it because I believed in the quid pro quo process. If I traveled more and earned more for the company, that would mean more benefits or stronger promotion opportunities for myself, right? So it was kind of on a contractual basis, but I was the only one that signed the bottom of that contract. So
I think it's fair to say that when you're actually applying your craft and seeing the change happen in other people, whether you are traveling or you're sitting still, it must be a pretty deep sense of satisfaction that reaffirms that
absolutely.
you've made the correct decision. I get it. It's it's mindful of, rock and roll bands that are traveling all the time, and none of them are going to tell you they like it, but the time that they love is when they're up doing what they're
Yes.
doing and making a difference in other people's lives.
Yeah.
So, one final question. Um, my background is in abnormal animal behavior, also in science, and becoming a financial advisor. Interestingly enough, that major really prepared me for that because when you deal with people's money, they're going to act abnormally more often than not. But I did find quite a difference in how I would deal with people that had a science background versus people that, let's say, had a liberal arts or even philosophy background. Um, how do you deal when you're working with scientists, for the most part? How do you deal with getting them to kind of embrace the softer areas that could unlock their true potential?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I behind the question, I assume is an assumption that a lot of sciences look to the harder or more factual, concrete type of thinking rather than the emotive or less
Definitely.
concrete, right?
Not exactly the
Yeah,
most emotional group of people you'll meet.
yeah. Well, here's my answer to that, right? At the core, we're all humans. And the way that I believe is when we're born into the world, we don't know what the world around us holds. We just know that there are people or authority figures around us that sometimes we believe should take care of us or help us. And so we grow up in early days, we think we're pretty egocentric and we believe that when we cry, we should get fed and our diaper should get changed, right? And we start learning this relationship with the world until we get to another stage, which is more what I would call the reactive stage. And in that reactive stage, we start learning that sometimes those needs don't get met, or sometimes things don't happen the way they want. You're not supposed to run in the hallways. You're supposed to raise your hand before you speak. Don't chew gum in the classroom, right? We learned some of these rules around us, and we thought, well, what am I going to do in relationship to this rule? And usually there are three choices. One of those are we're going to go over the rules, and I'll learn to outwit, outlast, outplay, and I'll be stronger than the rules. Another one will be I'll go with those rules or I'll comply with them, and I'll just be very obedient and things go along better for me. And the middle one is sometimes I'll go above the rules. I'll get into my own head or I'll write the rules, if you will. Right. And so, in general, in our reactive stages, we're learning one of those three patterns serves us well. Now, it can also guide our career to some extent. Those that have the outwit, outlast, outplay, we call those high executive functioning skills. And sometimes they end up in the boardroom. Those that have the go with the rules, we call those great leaders and great team managers because they help everybody understand how to fit and function well together, right? Those that go above the rules and go into their own head sometimes become scientists or people with a lot of letters after their name. They continue to go on to school because they believe eventually the search for real empirical truth will set them free. Now, all of those are great ways to learn about yourself and grow in the world, but sometimes they can also become restrictive because we have to eventually take responsibility for stopping our reactive patterns and starting our creative patterns. And so when we're creating, we're playing offense. We're not just bouncing back and forth between the rules of the road, right? So the way that I go about helping scientists who aren't always the ones that are in their head, but they generally have a pattern of saying, I'm going to search for empirical truth here, and that will set us free. Not they might have a little bit of the people pleaser in there, and they might have a little bit of the driver in there that goes above and beyond, but regardless, they've probably got this. The way that I go about helping those scientists is just helping them understand what's working for you and what's not working for you anymore, right? And that's, again, following the breadcrumbs of their energy leaks. Like, what is making you feel strong? What is making you feel depleted? Where in your day are these things happening? We do some 360s and some feedback to validate, are other people experiencing that around you that way as well? And when their own sense of self matches what other people are telling them, that yes, I see you getting too intellectual, or you get too aggressive, or maybe you're too passive, whatever those words are, and that's how they also feel their energy is leaking, then what happens? Audio meets visual, and they start connecting the synapses, and they're like, okay, it's time to change. So then we can open up a whole new world of what is available to them and say, where do you want to pivot? If you don't want to do what you've always done, then it's just going to require a little bit of courage to do something very different. So
Fascinating. You walk them through to their next experiment on
yeah,
themselves.
absolutely.
Really fascinating. Jim, this is really interesting. I mean, I can't disagree with one thing that you've said. You've given me a lot of things to think about, both in my consulting role and in a number of the apps that I'm developing around the financial services area, because it is all up here. It starts and it ends up here, and we decide what those points are. So, well done, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
How
you.
do people find you? Tell me the type of clients you're looking for.
Yep, I work with executive leaders. So that generally means founder, executive, CEO, entrepreneur, depending on sometimes. But mostly in the tech space, either ag tech or science and tech. I deal a lot with people who are in the biological sciences and pharmaceutical sciences or life sciences. Just my background was there. That's my education, and it's kind of my people. So I've made a career of helping them build their career or build their business or build their brand, either way. And I've realized I can do that better on the outside. So today, that's who I work with. They generally find me because active on LinkedIn. I'm constantly posting things that I've learned about myself or learned about from other clients. So there's quite a big following of people that follow that along for their own sense of advice or giving them a sense of understanding in the world. And then occasionally, when they've followed long enough and they realize I can't keep doing the thing I'm doing and expecting different outcomes, then I get this kind of sheepish call or a little email along the way and says, hey, that post that you just put up, that really resonated, something in there speaking to me. And I finally decided to look in. And so I wrote a book recently. It's called The Adventure Within. And it's chronicling 3 clients' journeys through this coaching space, just to show how you could try to go out through the rest of the world and change everything around you, but your power is not that great. You can't change everything externally, but what you can do is take the adventure within. So when a person gets to that place and they're like actually ready to look introspective and go, how am I going to make my future differently about me, not necessarily about the world around me? Then what I can do is I'll reach out. So people find me there. People find me on my website. A lot of people just find me referral and word of mouth as well. And then I'm constantly connecting with new leaders in this space just to keep myself fresh. I love to learn new technology and new science too. So I'm always reaching out to the biotech and pharma space to understand what's coming. So,
Jim, thank you so much for joining me today. It's just fascinating to talk to you. I think you and I are fellow travelers in that space. I also get up every morning wondering, what will I learn today? Which kind of keeps me moving forward. And as Clint Eastwood used to say, it doesn't let the old man in, because it keeps your brain running, which keeps everything else going.
sure.
We've been visiting with Jim Bishop, founder of Conjunction Leadership. And I must say, Jim, a thoroughly enjoyable conversation. I wish you the best of luck going forward. Thanks again for joining me on today's podcast.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to If the Public Only Knew. Don't forget to follow the show and share it with anyone who's ready for the real raw stories behind the business successes. Join Gary next time for another powerful conversation that will leave you inspired and ready to take action.